report contained particularly bad news for Australia's Great Barrier Reef, predicting that if the planet hits 2 degrees of warming instead, more than 99% of the world's coral will be wiped out.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And last week's dramatic report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change really sounded the alarm on the future of our planet, with scientists predicting the Great Barrier Reef could be wiped out by 2050 if we don't act to slow down global warming. And you would have thought that would make big headlines in Australia, given the reef is on the World Heritage List, our largest tourist attraction, and gives jobs to 60,000 people. So, what was front page news in the local papers? On Tuesday and Wednesday, News Corp's Cairns Post had this. News Corp's Townsville Bulletin had this. And News Corp's Daily Mercury in Mackay had this. Inside the paper, they all had something on climate, but typically only a few paragraphs, and the reef barely got a mention. Remarkable, eh? But in News Corp's tabloids around the country, the story was the same. Tuesday's Daily Telegraph had a horse on its front page.
Get off your high horse.
And its only climate story was 6 paragraphs inside the paper about going nuclear. The Courier Mail had this on the front, and the same small piece on nuclear power. And Melbourne's Herald Sun had this on the front page, and nothing at all in its news pages about climate or the reef. So, how could those News Corp papers all but ignore this huge story, which the Washington Post's Margaret Sullivan and ex-Guardian editor Alan Rusbridger reckon is the media's absolute duty to report?
The planet is on a fast path to destruction. The media must cover this like it's the only story that matters.
If voters are kept in the dark about global warming by newspapers, then urgent action by democratic politicians becomes 100 times harder.
Back in Australia, News Corp's columnists did think the IPCC warnings were worth noting, but only to ridicule the threat and the idea of doing anything about it, with Miranda Devine writing scornfully,
"This week's hysterical missive from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is just the latest case of the boy who cried wolf."
So, is Miranda a scientist? No. Nor is the Herald Sun's Terry McCrann, who went off even harder, branding the threat to the reef
Emotional and utterly dishonest. Blackmail deployed by the IPCC climate hysterics of the grubby coalition of theological climate extremists and greedy money-chasing renewable energy rent-seekers. Carpetbaggers and main chancers all.
Quite a broadside. To its credit, the Australian did give the IPCC front-page treatment, with Environment editor Graham Lloyd running a couple of stories. But within hours, the paper's columnists had switched to all-out attack, with Chris Kenny deriding the scientists' warnings as alarmism, virtue signalling, sanctimony and crying wolf. And Judith Sloan joined the chorus of derision by claiming that the IPCC report, written by 91 climate experts and citing 6,000 peer-reviewed papers, was not science and all old hat.
More people being inundated, more floods, droughts, you know, the normal catastrophic stuff.
Meanwhile, Environment editor Graham Lloyd, who should know better, had 2 swipes, declaring the scientists to be living in a parallel universe and attempting to discredit the data on which the warnings were based.
Claims of 70 problems found with key temperature dataset used by climate models.
The primary conclusion of the audit is the dataset shows exaggerated warming.
Lloyd's story mirrored identical attacks from leading climate skeptics the day before, led by James Dellingpole, another non-scientist who says global warming is a scam, on the notorious alt-right website Breitbart.
Climate bombshell. Global warming scare is based on careless and amateur data, finds audit.
And by Joanne Nova, who is a scientist but says the world should thank Australia for its CO2 emissions, who claimed,
The IPCC demands for cash rest on freak data. Empty fields, Fahrenheit temps recorded as Celsius, mistakes in longitude and latitude, brutal adjustments, and even spelling errors.
All 3 attempted demolition jobs relied on data analyst Dr. John McLean, whose work they all claimed showed the IPCC had got it hopelessly wrong. So, who is McLean? Well, let's get another of his fans, One Nation's climate expert, to introduce him.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Roberts and I'm with Dr. John McLean from Melbourne, and he's on Skype with us, and he is 13 years in climate science, and he's just conducted the first audit of the temperature database known as HADCRUT-4.
Maclean's audit of the data earned him a PhD from James Cook University in Townsville, where his supervisor was Peter Ridd, another well-known climate sceptic who was recently sacked. So, how good is Maclean's track record? Well, 7 years ago, he famously predicted...
It is likely that 2011 will be the coolest year since 1956, or even earlier.
That was 100% wrong. According to NASA...
The year was the 9th hottest in the past 130 years.
A previous academic paper of Maclean's in 2009, claiming El Niño was responsible for most of the rise in global temperatures, was ripped apart by climate experts who accused him of cherry-picking the data. His co-author then was yet another famous climate sceptic, the late Bob Carter, who liked to tell his admirer Alan Jones that man-made global warming was rubbish.
Well, there's only two words you can use to describe it. It's a farce and it's a circus.
It is.
And the sad thing about it is...
It's a lie. It's a lie.
And because of the way it is pushed, as you say, in the education system and in the news media, so many well-intentioned people have been sucked in.
The work that backs up Maclean's new data audit is dedicated to Bob Carter. So, is Maclean to be believed ahead of 91 leading climate experts and 6,000 peer-reviewed scientific papers when he claims the IPCC's work is worthless? The Australian, Breitbart, Joanne Nova and Miranda Devine clearly reckon he is. And so does Alan Jones, who cited Maclean last week in telling his listeners,
"Don't believe the global warming science is settled. It is corrupt."
One Nation's Malcolm Roberts is also convinced by Maclean's argument.
So this is what is underpinning the UN's climate scare, which is underpinning government policies in this country. What we need to do, John, is pull out of Paris.
Yes, but certainly should be stepping right back and saying, hey, this data is crazy. Come back to us when you've got some decent data and a convincing argument.
But how convincing is John Maclean? We asked a number of climate experts to review his audit. Professor Stephen Sherwood at New South Wales University's Climate Change Research Centre told us it
turns up little, if anything new, seems specifically motivated to discredit global warming.
And he added,
its naive claims of alternative causes of global warming do not consider the relevant laws of physics and do not make sense.
The ANU's Neroli Abraham, lead author of a coming IPCC report on the oceans, told Media Watch,
regardless of whether the PhD thesis work has any merit or not, the claim that this falsifies IPCC findings is wrong.
And the UK Met Office was just as emphatic, putting Maclean's, quote, 70 problems into context by pointing out that the HADCRUT dataset, which it looks after,
contains over 7 million points of data from in excess of 7,500 observation stations on land around the globe, together with millions of measurements of sea surface temperature. The small number of specific errors highlighted represent a tiny fraction of the data and, as such, are likely to have a negligible impact on the overall results. The long-term increase in global temperature is unequivocal. This is backed up by other globally recognised data sets, all of which are run independently and find very similar warming.
And that takes us back to the bigger picture, where the concern is that so much of News Corp treats climate science and the threat to our planet with such contempt. Why is that so? Presumably because Rupert Murdoch is a non-believer. But sadly, it's not new, and not just in Australia. Back in 2012, America's Union of Concerned Scientists audited News Corp's coverage in the US and concluded,
representations of climate science on Fox News Channel and in the Wall Street Journal opinion pages are overwhelmingly misleading.
And it then gave examples of what that coverage contained.
Broad dismissals of human-caused climate change, rejections of climate science as a body of knowledge, and disparaging comments about individual scientists. Furthermore, much of this coverage denigrated climate science by either promoting distrust in scientists and scientific institutions or placing acceptance of climate change in an ideological rather than fact-based context.
6 years later, the same determination to deny and denigrate climate science is flourishing in Australia. And what makes it even more serious is that in Australia, News Corp controls around 60% of our daily newspaper circulation. Not to mention a whole bunch of websites, and of course Sky News, which for once we have not even bothered to audit because we know too well what we'll find. And we should add, we put a series of questions to John Maclean. He declined to answer them. You can read the emails on our website. But now, to the unholy row over sexual diversity in religious schools. Here's the Sydney Morning Herald last Wednesday.
Secret plan for laws to reject gay students.
Exclusive.
That story, which was also splashed on the front pages of The Age in Melbourne and the Canberra Times, made it clear the federal government was cooking up laws to prevent some kids and teachers from entering the school gate.
Religious schools would be given the right to turn away gay students and teachers under anti-discrimination law changes recommended by the federal government's long-awaited review into religious freedom.
And that hot news gave morning TV plenty to chew over.
Under these proposed changes, religious schools would be able to turn away gay students and teachers at the school gate. It's a controversial move.
Is this not a huge step backwards for the gay community?
It is.
And with the Wentworth by-election coming up, opposition leader Bill Shorten was also quick to make hay.
New laws to discriminate against kids on the basis of sexuality? No way.
So, what did the Prime Minister have to say about giving schools new powers to discriminate against LGBTI kids? Well, he revealed an important fact, not clear in the Fairfax headline.
Well, they already can. That's the existing law.
Yep, someone forgot to tell the opposition leader that such a law already existed, and in fact was extended by a Labor government in 2013. Yes, really. And soon the Australian was reporting that Fairfax's front page story was incorrect and pointing out that the proposed reforms
would restrict the ability of religious schools to use existing laws to discriminate against teachers and students based on their sexual orientation or gender identity.
And how would it do that? By forcing the schools to publicly declare any intention to discriminate against a student on those grounds. And as law academic and anti-discrimination law expert Liam Elphick told Media Watch, that was potentially a very big change.
If you ask anyone in discrimination law, they'll tell you that's a huge deterrent. For a school to have to publicly say, we don't accept gay kids, they don't want to have to come out and say that.
But none of that was explained in the Fairfax story, which gave completely the opposite impression. And no doubt that's why the PM took offence at the paper's reporting.
For Fairfax to misrepresent it as the government was somehow going to do something against and discriminate against children of different sexuality, I thought was outrageous.
So, what does Fairfax have to say about the PM's charge? It told us
the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age is very comfortable with its reporting of the Ruddock Religious Freedom Review. Any suggestion we misrepresented the report in our series of exclusive news stories is wrong.
And Fairfax claims it certainly got it right in one respect. By revealing the contents of the review, they caused a row, big enough to force the government to declare its hand, which, with that Wentworth by-election looming, was to promise that discrimination in future will not be legal.
Scott Morrison's rushing a bill to Parliament to remove an, until recently, little-known legal exemption allowing religious schools to kick out gay students.
And what does Fairfax say to that move? Well, that it proves their coverage was spot on. Not sure about that, even if it did push the government over the line. And finally, to an ABC bungle that ruined a news veteran's goodbye.
Welcome to ABC News. We're going to take you to Victoria tonight for a special broadcast as Ian Henderson presents his final program. Ian has been the face of ABC News in Victoria since 1992 after joining the ABC in 1980.
Good evening, Ian Henderson with ABC News.
On Thursday night, Ian Hendo Henderson, Victoria's long-serving news presenter, had his family in the studio as he delivered his final bulletin, which was also simulcast nationally on the news channel. So, what could possibly go wrong? 10 minutes in, the gremlins struck.
A precious point of difference. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
That screen remained for nearly a full minute of frozen Shorten. And then it just switched to New South Wales.
And after a tumultuous few weeks, Premier Gladys Berejiklian is trying to hit the reset button.
The indignity. On Hendo's Night of Nights, Victorian viewers got a dose of Sydney politics, news and even weather. So next morning, ABC News executive editor Craig McMurtry fronted up to John Fane's Melbourne morning show and went the full grovel.
The first thing I need to say is, look, is an apology. It was awful. We were all in shock. It wasn't the way we wanted to send Hendo off. And I know, understandably, there's been a lot of concern about taking the Sydney Bulletin in that circumstance with no explanation. And look, all I can say, John, is that the studio was dead.
But that explanation was not enough for a furious Fane, who fired a series of angry questions at the ABC executive for the next 9 minutes.
When's the last time the Sydney News went off air?
Oh, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Because it doesn't happen.
Fane also blamed funding cuts for the debacle.
The organisation that you and I both work for and both love has undergone extraordinary funding cutbacks in recent times. You're going to have to do a fair job of persuading us that's got nothing to do with this, if indeed you're going to go down that path.
Well, it doesn't have anything to do with this.
Luckily, on Friday night, Hendo came back for another final curtain call.
Good evening, Ian Henderson with ABC News. Now, let's have another go at this.
And this time it went off without a hitch.
And that's it for this evening's program. And for me, the end of a long and happy stint at the ABC. Over the years, we've experienced the highs and lows of live television together, of which last night was certainly one.
We hope they paid him for the extra shift. And there's more about tonight's stories on our Facebook page or our website, where you can read a transcript and a statement from the Met Office and Fairfax Media, and also John McLean. And don't forget, Media Bites on your favourite social media platform every Thursday. But for now, until next week, that's it from us. Goodbye.